In this program, we're going to learn how to improve our file opening techniques. We're going to check to see if files actually exist. Sometimes it's good when they do, sometimes it's bad when they do. A nice thing about file objects is they have a method, .exists. It returns true or false and lets us know whether or not a file exists. You see I'm setting up the project in a class called Better File Opening. So again, we're going to use .exists, a file method. If we're trying to open a file, then it's good if .exists is true. It means the file is there and we will be able to successfully open it. If we want to create a file and it turns out it's the same name as a file that already exists, that's probably bad. We don't want to overwrite a file unless we're sure that's what we really want to do. So we can use .exists in both circumstances. I'm going to go to a program we already wrote back in the file reading project. So I'll open up the source folder and default package, and there's reading from files, a program we have already written. I'm going to open that program up and copy everything in the main method. So I'll copy it and paste it into the program that we're writing right now, Better File Opening. There it is. Got the indentation out of whack. Let's select all, and then we'll have Eclipse over in the source menu. We'll go down to correct indentation, which is Control-I. Select all was Control-A. Indentation is Control-I, and you see that Eclipse has fixed our indentation issues. Also going to need to bring our import statements over, so I will copy those from the previous program. You still see that red squiggly line because we've got to be able to handle a file not found exception or an IO exception. So we'll go ahead and add that to the main method header. Let's go copy a couple of files over. We'll bring over dogs.txt and cran03.txt and paste them into our project. Now we have a problem if a file doesn't exist. We have dogs.txt, cranzo3.txt. We don't have a file called dogsbark.txt. So if we try to open that file, we get a crash of the program with a file not found exception on line 27. There's no way to open the file that doesn't exist. Everything is okay when the file does exist. We have a similar issue in the second part of the program. If I type in crans111.txt, that's a file not found exception. You don't see line 52 right now, but that's where a scanner tried to open a file that did not exist. We want to avoid this program crashing, and we can use the method from files called .exists to take care of that. And here's how we can accomplish it. We want to do it before we attempt to open a file. We're going to create an if block. So we'll check to see if file1 .exists. The .exists method returns true or false. In this case, if it's true, that's good. Else, or otherwise, if it doesn't exist, that's bad. So we can take a bunch of code that we want to have happen if the file does exist and move it into the good part of the if block. If the file exists, we do want to go ahead and open the file, read its contents, and display it. If the file doesn't exist, we're going to actually end the program. So, going to copy and paste a bunch of the code here that is good to use as long as the file exists. And we'll move it into that good if block. And we can delete it from where we got it. If the file doesn't exist, we'll give the users a message to let them know that the file doesn't exist. We can use file1, that is a file object, but when we use it in this string circumstance, it will return the .toString method, which is the name of the file. We'll notify the users we're going to end the program, and we've done this before with some dialog box programs. We'll have system.exit and put a 0 for the argument, and that will terminate the program. So let's go back and change line 25 to a file that doesn't exist, dogsbark.txt. And that will go through the else part of our if block, and dogsbark.txt does not exist. When we switch it back to a file that really does exist, then our while loop runs, sees everything in the file, and prints it off. We want to do the same thing for the second part of this program. So pause the video and see if you can check for the existence of file 2 in the second part of the program. We're back. I've created an if block in the second part of the program. Hopefully you have as well. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. But we want to check to see if file 2 exists. If it does, we'll go ahead and open up the contents of the file and read them and display them. And if it doesn't, give the users a message that it doesn't exist. And for right now, we're going to terminate the program. I hope you've tested yours out. I'll type in food.txt, a file that does not exist. And I'll type in cran03.txt. This file does exist. And we got what we wanted. Now, if you're going to create a new file, maybe it's bad if the file already exists. There is a danger you may overwrite a file you really wanted and lose the contents. So it could be a good idea to check to make sure that the file does not exist. We'll still use the .exists method. This time, if it returns true, that's bad. If it returns false, that's good. It means we're going to create a file that file name is not already being used. We're not overwriting a file that we might need to keep. So we're going to get a file name from the user. I'll ask them to enter the name of a file. And I'll have them put in the .txt extension this time. We could always offer it to them, or whatever it is. Maybe it's .dat, could be whatever. But I'm going to ask them to include .txt. And I'll have file name 3 as a string object, and it will equal keyboard.nextLine, obtaining whatever the users type in from our prompt to enter in a file name. Next, we'll create a file object. This is our third file object in this program. I'll call it file3 equals new file, and it will have file name 3 as its argument. That's the string that contains the file name that the user is proposing to use for the file. Well, now we can check to see if the file already exists. Again, it's not good if it does exist. So if file3.exists, if that is true, that is going to be bad. Otherwise, that's good. The file doesn't exist. We're okay to make it. So we'll give the users some messages letting them know about this. We want to create a file. If it already exists, we're going to tell them the file already exists. You could also ask them, do you really want to create this file since it already exists? We're not going to let them do it in this example. Otherwise, if the file does not exist, it should be okay to go ahead and create it. So we'll give users a message that the file doesn't already exist and they are okay to create this file. So we'll run the program. I'll type in cran03.txt for that second part. Now for this last part, enter the name of a file to create. I'll try dogs.txt, but that file already exists and it's awesome. So the program is not going to let me alter that file. I'll run the program again. Remember, if I type a bad file name in the second spot, I'm not allowed to move on because that was bad when I wanted to read a file. But now if I type in a file name that doesn't exist, first I'll get through this part. cran03.txt does exist. Now down here, icecream.txt, I want to make that new file. Well, it's good that that doesn't exist. So I'm okay to create the file. .exists is a great strategy to use to improve our ability to open files and keep our programs from crashing.